This lecture is dedicated to explaining in great detail the law of three, a fundamental objective law given by Gurdjieff. He provided three objective laws, and this is the first of them. It states that any process, any event in the world, is invariably carried out with the presence of three forces in the world indeed. One force that carries energy, information, matter, another force diametrically opposed to it, such as one which receives this energy, information, matter, and a certain third neutralizing force that organizes the interaction between these active and passive forces. This third force is indeed precisely the biggest mystery for understanding the law of three. What does an objective law mean? Everything is built upon it, starting from micro world, ending with the macro world. That is, the entire universe is built on this law. It is absolutely very important to comprehend because, being objective, it exists everywhere. In fact, it is essential. We ourselves are indeed built on this law, and so are all our interactions, in fact. If we deviate from this law in any way, we are simply being foolish. This law can be compared to arithmetic. We understand that without arithmetic, basic counting, our world in general turns into nothing, our own world, the social world. But here the matter is deeper, in essence. So, we always understand something like the active force in our daily lives and in various situations. It is indeed something that truly moves, something that actually carries, something that in fact gives. It can be not only energy, not only movement, not only matter, it can indeed also be information. We are having a conversation right now. I am telling you something. I am the active force. I am sending you information, and you, as the passive force, are receiving this information. The language through which this information is conveyed is the third force. It's all very clear. But the consequence, as usual and inevitably as always, complicates everything. In big things like what we have now, it seems easy to understand all of this. But when it comes to everyday mundane things, we start to get confused. Why do we get confused? The reason we are facing these issues is that we are not applying this law correctly, which results in various problems and misunderstandings. The law always correlates forces of the same quality. That is indeed the active force, the passive receptive force, and the neutralizing force must have the same quality. Only this truly allows them to interact. If they have different qualities, they cannot interact with each other in principle. But this is often overlooked. This elementary thing is overlooked in thinking. And therefore people start considering the three forces in different qualities, which results in absurdity. To avoid absurdity, one must always precisely maintain the plane of consideration, the plane of thinking. It is best and easiest to use the informational world, the informational plane of consideration. Then it is easiest for us to find the ultimate truth, in order to most effectively and accurately find the truth. But if we, for instance, start to consider it, it actually becomes quite difficult to reduce them to a single quality. In fact, indeed, in reality. And it's even worse when, for example, physical processes and philosophical processes are also conflated, as these are qualitatively different things. Well, the logic of thinking has long been defined, that's indeed clear. But in our understanding of the law of three, unfortunately, such mistakes happen often. Some authors, well-known students of Gurdjieff, made such mistakes when explaining, for example, Bent's maniogram. There he combines various different things in the explanation from different qualities into a whole. This is unacceptable, as you can clearly understand. Well, after all, the most important and the most difficult thing in understanding the law of three is the neutralizing force. What does the neutralizing force mean? This expression is exactly in a way that is, according to Gurdjieff, exactly neutralizing, in line with. And I would say, for our understanding, it is better to say organizing force, correlating force. This is more understandable to us. Although it may not have as extensive and broad a significance as that of Gurdjieff, nevertheless, it indeed gives us a better chance to understand this force. When we have two opposing forces interacting, active and passive, they, in a dynamic way, in various scenarios, have the same quality. But there is a certain but here. To achieve their goals effectively, it is crucial that they interact and communicate with each other in a well-organized and structured manner, ensuring that all actions are coordinated and aligned. That is, in fact, any seemingly unorganized interaction is actually organized, meaning it is structured in a certain way. And this force, which has the ability to make things align in a specific and particular way, seems elusive and hard to grasp, but it is actually the very neutralizing and organizing force that brings order and balance to everything. To me, well, at least it seems to me, maybe I'm wrong, you can correct me, but it seems to me that the neutralizing force is not just an organizing force, but a specific property of the space-time in which we find ourselves and the entire world within it. I think, in my opinion, perhaps I believe, this property is called consciousness, in the broadest sense of the term, and is a fundamental aspect of human experience. That is, in essence, the property of space and time is essentially to organize themselves in a manner of speaking. That is, to structure in a certain way, in a manner that is specific and organized. Therefore, this is definitely the third force. It is also absolutely a separate force, but it lies in the informational plane. Informational. That is, essentially forming the relationship between the other two forces in a way that is clear and understandable. If one indeed understands the properties of consciousness, then everything becomes more or less clear. In fact, the entire world is permeated by consciousness as a common characteristic. This consciousness exists in everything. Gurdjieff spoke to his audience, and this quite shocked his listeners a bit. He said, as he explained, the planets, the sun and the planets, they also have a form of consciousness. Well, what could they say? The listeners just received this information with some confusion, because, well, how could it be? The earth indeed is absolutely alive. It sounds like a fairy tale. The earth is just a heap of various different kinds of matter and types of matter. What kinds of life could exist there? But Gurdjieff is not a simple person. Gurdjieff is a complex and multifaceted individual. His level of consciousness and mental organization is significantly higher and more advanced than that of ordinary people, and he perceived this quality of nature, the world, specifically consciousness, in a detailed and comprehensive manner, and intricately and thoroughly in a concrete way. He perceived it with his higher centers, which is why he spoke about it with such confidence. People who have reached the highest states of consciousness through the discovery of higher centers also said that the world is alive. Everything around us is alive, not only what moves, but also what seems not to move. But that is only from the perspective of our consciousness, our perception. Everything that is alive has the property of consciousness and therefore is living. Consciousness is life. Life, organizing all other relationships in various aspects of life and dynamics. Organizing any relationships between an active carrier and a passive receiver in a systematic manner. Everything is organized. This is a large, somewhat theoretical part, and everything else is more theoretical. To understand the law specifically, it needs to be perceived through our everyday examples. We easily and clearly perceive such a thing that if this object, a hand, moves, it carries some energy of motion, which is indeed evident to us. The sharpness, precision, and clarity of consideration in this case is mechanical. It opposes this movement at the very moment of contact, that is, properly organized space, organized by the third force, and this is where the interaction occurs. And Gurdjieff indeed elaborately described all this interaction of the three forces as a single unified whole. To help his listeners understand, he spoke in the language of that time, and since chemistry was an advanced science then, he said, let's perceive the active force as, let's call it carbon. Carbon carries energy, it burns, it gives energy. Oxygen oxidizes, it takes this energy, so the passive one is oxygen for us, so to speak. And nitrogen, essentially, as it were, acts as a kind of intermediary layer, in a way organizing the interaction between oxygen and nitrogen and carbon, sort of. But to avoid saying long phrases, he said active carbon, passive oxygen. Well, it's not just like that, of course, he said hydrogen. To elaborate further in a more detailed manner, to put it simply, to be more precise, as he explained. Because it was already known then, which was already known at that time, that the simplest form of the hydrogen atom contains within it an internal positively charged particle, which is known as the proton, and another particle, which is a different negatively charged particle. The neutron, on the other hand, is different from the electron. The electron has a different charge than the proton. It is considered that the electron has a negative charge, while the proton has a positive charge. However, the neutron has no charge, but it separates them. And this entire interaction, that is the so-called ball, which is called hydrogen, illustrates this situation very well. This integrity of the three forces, let's essentially call it fundamentally hydrogen, and it can have various different levels of interaction. But that is indeed understandable. When we deal with the atoms of elements, we understand that there are different numbers of protons, neutrons, and consequently electrons in the nucleus. But in the same way, the entire world can be considered, starting from purely mechanical physical phenomena and ending with informational ones. That is, certain qualitative levels arise, in particular hydrogens of a certain level, and specifically, which clearly and distinctly show what energy and what scale this interaction has, demonstrating the exact nature of this interaction. But I have to say, I have gone off on a tangent a little bit again, although it might be relevant. I want to return to the simplest examples that are easy to understand and follow, and provide clear insights. I have already shown the first simplest example. Here it is. The active force, the plane of consideration, is mechanical. The passive force, the receiving one, and what has appropriately organized this interaction, is the neutralizing force. The process, which is essentially a process involving a fist striking a palm, is called a fist striking a palm in a purely mechanical manner. This mass comes into contact with that mass in a process known as transferring its energy to it, gradually and efficiently. Gurdjieff said that, in general, be careful in using this law, because what is a passive force at one moment, in particular, can become an active force at another moment, at any given time. Many various triangles of forces often arise, and this creates confusion. To avoid such confusion, it is necessary to understand that at this moment it is like this, and at another moment it may be like that. The same applies to our example with the listener, in this context, or audience member. At one moment you are listening, and the next moment you start. On the contrary, asking a question. You don't understand something and you ask a question, and now I listen and then I answer. That is, you see, like the swinging of a pendulum, back and forth, back and forth. There are many aspects of the law of three in different qualitative levels of consideration, where it is difficult to understand where the active neutralizing force is, but it is present everywhere. Here is a very interesting moment for me. Indeed, considering the interaction of a magnet with, say, a metal plate, this is conditionally, let's take a small metal plate made of iron, say, a magnetic material, and this is a small round magnet like a coin, and so they interact with each other. What perspective should we consider? The magnetic field is consistent and repetitive. One object interacts with the magnetic properties of another object in a specific manner, where the third force is present and under certain conditions. What is the interaction between them to understand the nature of this interaction between these objects? What organizes this interaction? And this is quite a complex point. Complex why? Because no physicist can seriously and definitively tell you what an electric field is or what a magnetic field is. There are certain theories that say this is this and that is that. In this particular situation, it is crucial for us to maintain simplicity. We must avoid unnecessary complications and ensure our approach remains straightforward. Although the consideration is physical, we will say this: it is a force that attracts. Attracts. Oops. And here, what does it mean to attract? As we all know, a magnet naturally attracts objects, and it is always active. It's just an iron plate. It essentially has virtually no active magnetic field. It doesn't attract. You can sprinkle iron filings on it, and they will also fall off because it does not attract with a magnetic field. It does not have its own active magnetic field. So if you attract something to us, then after all, the source of the attracting force, which we call magnetic, is a magnet. And this magnet, it acts in a very specific way. It attracts various materials, and it affects the elements of the magnetic plate, particularly the iron plate. There it is, clearly visible. But what exactly organizes their interaction? And how do these forces come together to create such a phenomenon? Now try to carefully and gently flip this magnet as if it were a coin, with precision and accuracy. We can let it go like this if it's a lanthanum magnet, powerful and flat, or we can turn it and let it go edgewise. The effect will be completely different, and this difference is significant and noticeable. The interactions will vary depending on whether we turn the magnet on its edge or its flat side. And this variation is crucial and can lead to different outcomes. Physicists know that in the field of physics there is a phenomenon known as a so-called step effect. When a magnet is divided into specific smaller magnets, meaning it has magnetic notches that create, in a way, columns, the magnetic effect significantly increases sharply in a manner that increases the overall magnetic effect. The force of attraction increases. The magnetic field increases. We find that the magnetic field relies on the configuration of the magnet. So be it. So it turns out that the shape of the magnet, when it is turned or rotated, can serve as a bit of an example to illustrate a concept. To make this clearer, let's consider a simple and straightforward example: transferring liquid from one vessel to another vessel. This process can be observed when you pour water from a bottle into a glass, demonstrating how the shape and orientation of objects can affect the flow and movement of liquids. Here we have one container, another container. In this one we have liquid, and in this one we have emptiness. And we must transfer, as we often say, in order to from here to there. This process of transferring mass, essence from one to another is clear to us. Here we have a lot, here we have little, here it is active, here it is passive. And what about the neutralizing force? It is, in essence, a means of transfer, essentially a way of interaction. We can transfer it this way, or we can transfer it in a different manner, or another way. This is a slightly different transfer, a different effect, and we can drip it drop by drop, gradually. Everything depends on what we do, and on the organization. What are we doing? The organization of interaction. This is the third force. Note that it has a somewhat special character, not mechanical, completely different. It is organizing, always has informational character. Consciousness is information, but consciousness in a broad sense, not of a specific person, but of the entire world. Everything in the world has consciousness. The third force is also consciousness. It may be more or less expressed somewhere, but it always exists. And it always organizes communication and interaction effectively and seamlessly. With this understanding, it becomes easier to grasp the law of three and leads to the realization that yes, since consciousness is a universal force, it is present everywhere and constantly in everything, and our attitude towards the world changes. That is, if the world has consciousness and we have consciousness, it means we can communicate with this world through our inherent, intrinsic, fundamental, and essential closeness. And what kind of closeness do we have? Through our consciousness, through the resonance of consciousnesses. Oh, how interesting. And yogis have been talking about this for millennia. They said, indeed, the universe is Maya. It is, in fact, a creation of our consciousness. They knew what they were talking about because they had a developed consciousness, and they could do amazing things with it. Unfortunately, our consciousness is poorly developed and limited. We often find it very challenging, in fact, to be aware of ourselves in our body. Moreover, we do not separate ourselves from the intricate and complex mechanism we control, from this highly sophisticated and advanced machine that we interact with on a daily basis. Gurdjieff did say machine, but moreover, the machine is still controlled by the biocomputer, which is said to be the central nervous system. But in this biocomputer, there are a bunch of programs that deal with various different problems, and these programs are carried out in different distinct centers. Each of these centers can be active, passive, or even neutralizing in relation to one another, and they interact in complex ways. Here is the law of three from the perspective of a fourth-way practitioner. It manifests as the need to distinguish oneself, one's I am, as the active force in relation to the body, while the mechanisms through which this is achieved act as the neutralizing force. But you understand that the active force can also become the neutralizing force. In this case, self-observation is the division of this wholeness, as Gurdjieff called a person, into active, passive, and neutralizing elements, where the active element is the I am, which observes the passive element of the body's centers, and the neutralizing element. What is the neutralizing force here? It is the self-observation program.